Welcome to this session on creating effective learning sequences for your program. Key learning targets, setting reasonable expectations and making certain that learners can truly meet those expectations, and then applying learn strategies in student and also in teacher programs to check for learning. We will be drawing on the STARTALK infographic for the principal implementing a standards-based and thematically organized curriculum with this quote that's on that infographic by Stephen Covey, that beginning with the end in mind means starting with a clear understanding of your destination, knowing where you are going so that you better understand where you are now, so that the steps you take will always be in the right direction. And that's something that we want to keep in mind, truly knowing what it is we hope to accomplish. So each of our programs, we select our program can-do statements. And this is from the model curriculum, the newest one, our ecological footprint. The program can-do statement asking learners to think about what cities are doing to create sustainable living. And then we figure out in stage 2 that evidence piece. What will that performance assessment task be? How will learners either present or interact in the interpersonal mode? Here you can see that there's an expectation of having some images and asking and answering questions to see what a certain city is doing and moving from one group to another and sharing information. We unpack those into the lesson can-do statements. And at that level of stage 3, we indicate what our learners are going to need to be able to do in the interpretive mode so that they can produce language, in this case, in the interpersonal mode and or in the presentational mode. So the notion that they're always moving from input to output. You have to be cautious at that level where you're starting to write your stage 1 program can-do statements, because we know that in the case of this curriculum, 5 program can-do statements meant that there were 5 performance assessment tasks. And when we unpacked those into lesson can-do statements, it resulted in 25 lesson can-do statements. And that may be the right amount for your program length, for the age of your learner, but it may be that when you think about your 3-week program, that you're finding that, whoa, this was really a lot, because that's truly the challenge, thinking through, will it fit? Is it too much? Or am I just coming up with so many good ideas and I really want to get them all in there, but I just can't. It's not going to fit in my particular suitcase. Be thoughtful. So in a traditional summer, 90 hours was a typical program length. But if we think about 5 performance assessments, 25 lesson can-do statements, 90 hours, and we start subtracting out those hours for lunch and break, and then the hours that are dedicated to activity classes, yes, they're using language, but it's not truly focused tightly maybe on all of our lesson can-do statements. Maybe there was going to be a 6-hour field trip. Maybe this year that's a virtual field trip. We had some expectation at the end of the program that we were going to set aside some time to do something with parents and or the community. And so what happened is we lost 32 hours right away, leaving us with only 58 hours to do those 25 lesson can-do statements. And so we started thinking about, how can we help programs plan for this and really think at the curriculum level, is it doable? And so we created this document, just really asking that you think through those lesson can-do statements. When will you introduce them? Will it be week 1, week 2, week 3? Maybe more importantly, when will you recycle them? When will you plan to give that performance assessment task? What week will that be? And that might help programs to feel more comfortable taking some stuff away. I know that that's happened frequently when we're working on our model curriculum. All of a sudden we're paring down, we're deciding to prioritize this over this. And you'll notice that in this sequencing document, that just because it comes up in program can-do statement 5 doesn't mean that it waits till week 3 to be introduced. You're looking for logical connections between your program can do statements and using those connections to introduce and recycle and finally assess. You may do this in different ways. We know that some programs have sort of listed them and put them on calendars by number. We know that some programs have written them all out on Post-it notes and given some thought to where they would go and how it would be placed. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I'm giving 2 major performance assessments on day 9. Maybe that will work. Maybe I don't want it to be that in my particular program, and I will adjust accordingly. It moves us into stage 3, where we know that we have our lesson can do statements, our learning targets, and that we will have an activity that checks for learning. And what we want to make sure we're doing for each of our lesson can do statements is having that plan. So in your curriculum, you're writing your lesson can do statements. When you write your learning plans, you will be writing checks for learning. The model curricula do have now suggestions that you might be able to pull from and use. All of these checks for learnings that we're using now in the model curricula are coming from Learn, the renamed classroom activities, the Learn language learning activities. And there are more than 60 of them there that you can sort by mode of communication with specific directions, with adaptations now for online or distance learning. So a collection that can be helpful to you when you're writing your curriculum. So you've got your learning target in place. In this case, I'll go back to the one that I had selected earlier. I can recognize lifestyle choices that contribute to a sustainable lifestyle. And I've got my check for learning there of picture sequencing. So the teacher is going to make some comments and that represents different pictures. And the students are going to be able to select the correct picture and put them in the correct order. Now I'm further check to see if this is doable, if I can pack this suitcase. I've got to think about what language chunks, what words, questions, answer frames do they really need in order to be able to do this. And when I have that in place, I can really begin to plan my sequence of learning that will move learners from I do to you do alone. In order to determine the language chunks, I've got to go and find that resource, that authentic resource, preferably the adapted authentic resource, depending on what my language is and what's available. In this case, I put up a French one, and even if you don't speak French, because it's highly visual, you might get a sense of what some of this vocabulary is going to be that I can pull on. And so it's a good idea to know your resource before you actually finalize your vocabulary. Another image that I might use with solar panels. So it leads me to think that I'm going to be getting them to recognize in this interpretive that question, what does a sustainable city have? A sustainable city has, and then they're going to hear completion words. What does a sustainable city do? And then they're going to hear completion words. What do people do? And then they're going to hear frames that complete that question. And I'm going to have to design a series of activities that make the learners understand these words. Since it's interpretive, they're not going to be producing them. They're just going to hear me say them and put those pictures in the correct sequence, or hear, not me, but hear their teacher, their instructor say them. When you see that kind of list, that was a pretty decent chunk of vocabulary that we would be using in the different lesson can do statements for that program can do statement. So the question becomes, how much time will it take for each learner to truly meet the expectations of a lesson can do statement? And when you start to think about that, you start to develop that notion of more reasonable expectations. Can we move from that overpacked suitcase where things were falling out, which is an analogy for our brain, too much too fast, and we will not remember it the next day, to a very organized, thoughtful packing where the expectation of learning increases because we've been very deliberate about the choices we've made and how much we think we can really do within the scope of our program. So keep this message of less is more in mind. You can find the model curricula at the URL listed here on the StarTalk website. And just a reminder that StarTalk is a federal grant program that is funded by the National Security Agency and is being administered by the National Foreign Language Center. Thank you for your attention and hope this was helpful.